Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AAS YouTube channel. And this is part of the Sky and Telescope series. And I'm very happy to have Sky and Telescope author, Alan Dyer with us today. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Frank. Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation to speak.
Well, thank you. And we are a few hours past solstice on December 21st.
Yes, happy solstice to you and to everyone. The days in the Northern Hemisphere now start getting a little longer, but the nights get shorter, which is maybe a good thing, or it depends where you're. If you're an astronomer, maybe you like the long nights.
Right. Absolutely.
But I like the warmer weather.
Yeah, we'll start now. We'll kind of hit, I'm in Phoenix, and so we'll hit our coldest weather in January. And then we'll go back up. And where are you located at, Alan?
Well, I'm in southern Alberta. I live out in the country, rural Alberta. So I've got nice dark skies, and which is great for doing the kind of writing I do for Sky and Telescope, testing equipment. It's easier to do. Not to trek it all out into a dark sky to do the astrophotography testing. I live in southern Alberta. It's about 100 kilometers east of Calgary, which would be the big city people would know. And wintertime, it was minus 20 Celsius last night. And we're well into winter now. And of course, even though the nights are getting shorter, the days are going to get colder for the next couple of months, and we don't start to see some semblance of spring until March or April, perhaps. But we'll see how the winter goes. It's been pretty mild up to now, but we're well into it now.
And that's a pretty awesome shot behind you. Did you take that?
Yeah, this is from last night. And in fact, there's Venus. There's Venus, because we have three planets in the evening sky now: Venus, and then up above it Saturn, and then up above Jupiter. Very nice line of three across the sky. Here I was just focusing on Venus and a little panorama to get the twilight colors, which very clear night last night, and you get that beautiful gradation of colors in the twilight sky, and of course a nice snowy landscape. This is just a couple miles down the road from where I live. Cool. And I was hoping with binoculars to see Comet Leonard, which is somewhere in here, but forget it. Word has it that it's exploded in brightness, but as of last night, I couldn't see it, even in binoculars. And so it made a nice picture with the twilight, but forget the comet. I'm too far north. That's just 51 degrees north latitude is where I live. Okay.
Well, maybe I'll get up there tonight and give it a whirl and break out my binoculars. So very cool.
But yeah, from further south, I think the comet, southern hemisphere friends in Australia are seeing it because it's up much higher for them. And so, but I had one chance at it in the morning sky a couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago as we record this, before it disappeared, and then has now reemerged in the evening sky, but too low for me at my latitude to see it. But I had a nice view of it in the morning sky for one morning when the clouds cleared.
There you go. Very cool. So I'm curious, do you have when you get outside, when it's minus 20 there, do you have a dome, or do you go on natural?
No, I've never built an observatory. I leave the telescope on the mount outside and cover it up, and so I can more easily put a scope on it and get things hooked up and running. But I was going to do that last night. It was, as you can see, this was taken last night, the solstice eve, as we record this. And it was beautiful, clear night. And I was thinking, I should get a camera going. I said, nah, it's minus 20. It's nothing works right. I just forget it. So I didn't. If I had something I really had to test, some equipment or something for a deadline, the next issue of Sky and Telescope or whatever, that really desperate to get some test results in, I would do that. But my limit is about minus 15 Celsius. We're talking Celsius here in Canada. Yeah, sure. I said, forget it. No matter how clear the night was, why torture yourself?
There are limits. So how long have you been writing for Sky and Telescope?
Well, I've been on the masthead, and then I am one of the contributing editors to the magazine that you see below the main editors and staff. and one of those contributing editors. And that's since 1996, I think it was.
Wow.
When at the time, my editor, Dennis Chico, who was looking after the equipment reviews for many years, invited me to join the staff in a sense, in an informal way, contributing editor, which means I get to do about 2 or 3 stories. Different contributing editors contribute different frequencies of stories, but I'm not in there every month or even every 2 months, just every 2 or 3 times a year, 4 times a year, maybe, with equipment reviews primarily. Okay. When now my editor now, Sean Walker, and I decide, oh, there's a piece of equipment that suits my skills, and I don't like to have anything that's too big because it's got to be shipped to me in Canada and too expensive to ship and whatnot. So something is practical to get to me to test out, and the kind of equipment I like to use as well, because if you're going to spend many nights using it, you don't want to struggle with it. You want to be able to enjoy using it. And so when Sean and I can decide some items that are well suited to what I like to do, we'll arrange to get something sent to me, or I will arrange if it's maybe available locally. I can borrow something, and so I'll do several of those a year, the equipment reviews. But the story we're going to talk about today is not a review. It's more of like, I'm not testing actual lenses. I'm just giving you a survey of what to look for when you're buying a lens, the specifications, the kind of specs, the kind of features, and how should you narrow down your choice to pick the right one. So we call that a gear guide or a buyer's guide. And so I've been doing a couple of those recently, the most recent one being lenses. And then before that, a few months earlier, there was a binocular buyer's guide I did.
Oh, yeah.
So I did do little tiny mini reviews of different models that I've used, that I could say how well these different models tested. But primarily it was a survey through the kind of specs that you look for now in binoculars, and how that's changed over the last few years. Some of the old arguments about what was the best binocular don't apply anymore, because those models simply not available anymore. But in this case, we're talking about lenses, and boy, that's changed a lot, even in the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, very cool. And so we're going to see a few of those in this very lovely column. Gear guide. Choosing the best lenses for nightscapes. And Alan, take us away.
All right. Yeah, this was an article. I can't remember if Sean might have suggested. Would you be interested in writing an article about this? Or I might have suggested. I don't remember. But the focus was on picking the right lenses to use on your camera, with the focus literally on nightscapes. This kind of image here that we're showing you, which is also used on the cover of the January issue. I was very pleased with that. That was wonderful. Yeah. So it's a cover story. Nightscapes, meaning pictures of the stars, Milky Way constellations, or in this case, the comet, not the one that's in the sky now, but the one we had in July 2020, Comet Neowise, which was so photogenic above a landscape. So nightscapes are what we call the traditional kind of landscape images, but taken at night with the stars and the Milky Way or the comet or the aurora or air glow in this particular case.
Very cool. Right.
So what's the best lens to pick for that? And you might be doing this kind of landscape photography by day and have a lens that you like to do that kind of photography, and it might work great at night, but the key factor, the key specification is speed. We kind of say that right at the top of the story here, the sort of need for speed. Aperture is key. And that's how wide open the lens can get. And people struggle with, say, they might have an entry-level camera, or when they bought with a kit lens. We call it kit lens, kit zoom.
I've seen
and it's perfectly fine for a lot of work by day and even by night. But when you get into this kind of shot where it's dark and literally the landscape is lit only by starlight, in this case, there's not even any moonlight. There's a little bit of ambient light from the hotel, which is off to the right. But you need speed. You need a fast lens, an f2.8 or faster lens. And most kit zooms don't have that. And people want to get into this kind of photography with that kit zoom, and they struggle.
Yeah.
Then the results just, they're not getting the depth of detail. Images are too noisy. They're just not getting the kind of results they emulate, they see others publishing.
Right. How do I get that? How do I get that?
Yeah, exactly. What do I need? And often they might think, I need to buy a better camera. Well, you might. I mean, it's possible. But the key to success is the lens, is buying the fast lens, f2.8 or faster, as we say. F2 is faster yet, but it lets in twice as much light as a f2.8 in a given exposure time. F1.4 is twice as fast again. But 2.8 is a pretty good ballpark number. And there are lots to pick from. And you don't have to spend a lot of money to get a suitable Nightscape lens that has that kind of required speed of f2.8. So we call them fast lenses, as we say, because they bring in more light in a given exposure time. Because for a shot like this, I had the camera on a tracker, as we see here. And so that does lengthen the amount of time you can shoot for, because the camera is tracking the sky.
Right.
But many Nightscapes you take just with the camera on a fixed tripod. And so you're limited in the exposure time, because if you go over 20 or 30 seconds, the stars are going to trail, which typically you don't want in a Nightscape. And so that limits the maximum exposure time you can use.
Got it.
You want to get as much light as possible in that time available to you. And that's where the fast lens is important.
Nice. Let's slide down a little bit and take a look at.
But yeah, as we now we say, okay, that's what you want to look for, a fast lens. But there's always trade-offs with the equipment, and the faster the lens, the more it's prone to what we call aberrations, lens aberrations, where particularly at the edges or the corners of the frames, stars start to distort and turn into comets. They all turn into comets. Aberrations, off-axis aberrations, or even right in the center, where fast lenses can be soft when they're used wide open. The stars just don't look as sharp as you'd like them to be. And so it's always a trade-off with aberrations versus speed. And on the top right, we're showing another sort of aberration, but it's present in even the best lenses, where at very fast apertures, this is f2 in this particular case, we have what's called vignetting, where the field is not evenly illuminated at wide open at f2. So it's very dark at the corners. And generally you don't want that. It makes the image look a little more tunnel vision. You kind of want to brighten and have a more uniform illumination. And so some lenses are more prone to that than others, and it's often not a factor of cost. The better lenses, I've got one right here. This is $2,000 or $3,000 lens here, 15 to 35. It's got quite a bit of that vignetting. It's very sharp from corner to corner. It's superb, but it does have quite a bit of the vignetting. So this is a Canon mirrorless lens, 15 to 35, which we'll talk about a little bit more at the end.
Very cool.
But what you can do with that is what I'm showing here in the illustration is a lot of image processing software has the data in it for what the correction should be to brighten that particular lens. And you dial it in, or the software automatically detects what lens was used to take that picture and automatically applies the correction. Whereas I'm showing here, where the lens is a manual lens and doesn't transmit its information to the camera and to the image as to what lens was used to take the picture. You have to go in this case, I'm showing Adobe Camera Raw, and pick the brand and the model of lens you used, and then it will apply a correction that is in its database, or you might have to dial it in with the little vignette slider I'm showing there.
Yeah,
and
right.
this is an illustration of on the left without correction, and on the right, once up, literally one click, and it's now made that image more uniform across the frame.
Indeed.
And so that's the thing that we have now. We didn't have a few years ago, 20 years ago with the film, with the digital cameras. You know, we have so much of this automatic fixing of problems with lenses that the software can do, and vignetting is one of them. So
cool.
So that's and not everybody's aware that, you know, you can do this. So we wanted to point that out.
Absolutely.
That even if your lens isn't automatically correcting, you can do it manually yourself in the software.
Cool.
And then down at the bottom of what I think is the second page, we're now illustrating more classic optical aberrations with a very good lens, a Sigma 14 millimeter art lens. It's one of the best around. It's available for many brands of cameras, and showing you how when you use it wide open at f1.8, which is very fast for a 14 millimeter lens, I think there's only one other lens on the market that's as wide and as fast as that. The stars are we're looking at the extreme blow up of the corners are, you know, they look like little seagulls. They're distorted. Plus the corner is dark. As you stop the lens down to 2.8, it's much sharper, more brighter, more evenly illuminated. And at f4, it's pretty darn sharp. Now, you're spending a lot of money for an f1.8 lens and maybe not using it wide open, but that wide aperture does have a place for like auroras, fast moving auroras, or other things where you really need to grab stuff fast. It's nice to have the aperture, but typically a fast lens, you will stop it down a little bit, maybe not to f4, but to f2 or 2.8, just to sharpen it up a little bit. But that's still pretty fast. And that gives you a lot of opportunity for grabbing nightscapes at 2.8.
Cool.
So it's aberrations versus typically aperture and f ratio, but also cost. The lower cost lenses have worse aberrations than the higher cost lenses, but even the premium lenses like the Sigma Art are not, without some aberrations particularly at the edges of the frame, the corners of the frame. And we are looking at the toughest subject there is in photography, is stars, points of light at the corners. So we see exactly when they're not points of light, we see them distorted. So we are very fussy as astronomers, so we notice these aberrations more than anybody else.
Indeed. Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit of cost here on manual versus auto.
Yes, and as I said a little bit ago, an f2.8 lens is what you kind of want to aim for, if not faster. And typically a wide angle lens as well, because we're taking big scenes. There's, as we go through the article, we'll see illustrations of similar scenes taken at different focal lengths, and almost every focal length of lens, from super wide angle fisheye to a modest telephoto, has a place in nightscape photography. But I would say 80% of your nightscape pictures are going to be taken with a wide angle lens, 14 to 24 millimeters, something like that.
Okay.
But what we don't necessarily have to have is an autofocus lens, which are going to be the more expensive types of lenses, because we are almost always manually focusing at night.
Yeah,
so I spend money on an autofocus system in a lens that you're just going to turn off and put on to manual focus. And so manual focus lenses are readily available for all kinds of cameras, Canon, Nikon, Sony, whatever.
Right.
Typically from third parties, not from the original manufacturer, but from other manufacturers of third-party lenses. And because they don't have all the electronics and the motors and things like that, they're much less expensive. And so you can get a good manual lens. What have I got here? Here's a 11 millimeter full frame fisheye. I used it to take one of the pictures in the article that we'll see in a moment.
Cool.
And this is a 11 millimeter f2.8, so it's very wide, super for the Aurora. And I forget the cost. It was $300 or $400,
okay,
which is pretty low considering a good automatic lens like I showed you here. Well, like I got here, you know, you're looking at 10 times the price.
Yes.
This is a zoom 11 to 35, so it's obviously more complex in that regard, but nevertheless, and this is autofocus.
Yeah.
And so that's you're paying for a lot more for the autofocus features, which may be important to you if you want to use it for other purposes, but for Nightscape, you don't really need autofocus.
Okay, cool.
So that's the thing, is you can save a lot of money. This is where we're talking manual versus autofocus. A 14 millimeter lens, that's a very popular lens for Nightscape, and there's many models available. F2.8 is very common.
Okay.
That same lens, as we show here, $250 you can get a lens like that, or up to 2,000. And so what's the difference? Well, the more expensive are going to be autofocus and have better optics, but a manual focus f14 and f2.8 can still be pretty good at $300, $400. Like the Samyang and Rokinon lens is very popular. I think I show one on the next page. That's a very popular lens there, right there on the top of the next page. On the right there, it's one I no longer have, but I had a picture of it, 14 millimeter Rokinon f2.8. We don't get into a lot of the specifics of brands and lenses in the article, but I do show some examples, obviously, and that's one of probably the most popular lens for Nightscape. Samyang or Rokinon's different, same lens, different brands from Korea. F2.8 manual lens, manual focus.
Okay.
What I say, $300.
Yeah, nice.
Optics are not fabulous, but they're very good. They're very good, and so that's a very popular lens. Don't have to spend a lot of money. It's not one you might buy otherwise, but if you want to do Nightscapes, that's a very good lens to get into. Okay. But I'm showing several others here, all 14 to 15 millimeter. There's the Sigma Art lens on the left there that I just showed the aberration shots. That's a big piece of glass, but that's autofocus. The one on the next one over is this one here. This is again Rokinon or Samyang, but it's a better grade. It's a higher class of lens called the SP Special Performance. It's manual. It's got a manual focus ring. It's not autofocus, but it has better optics in it. The one I just showed you, the other Rokinon. And the other nice thing about it, even though it's manual, it's got electrical contacts here, which transmits data to the camera, so the camera knows what lens is attached to it.
Cool.
And so that's useful for that vignetting correction. So the camera knows exactly what aperture you set it at, right. And for doing those lens corrections automatically. So it picks that up. And a lot of manual lenses don't have that. This does, it's manual, but does actually talk to, but you're paying $800 or $900 for this lens. Yeah. Whereas other lenses, one that I'm showing actually in that set of 4 that I just showed you, this is a Venus Optics 15 millimeter. This is a favorite lens of mine. In fact, I bought it twice, one for Sony and one for Canon. But this is for the Canon, but it's got the right lens mount to go on a Canon mirrorless lens, but it does not have any electrical contacts. You put this on a camera, it doesn't know what's attached. It just says no lens there. And so you have to remember that you shot that picture with the 15 millimeter and what aperture you set it for with the manual aperture ring here, showing here, because that doesn't get recorded at all. But it's a very nice lens optically, and this is, I got this for about $800, I think it was. So it's not cheap, but it's a very good lens, very sharp, and f2. This is f2.
Ooh, wow. Okay.
So it's really good. And this has been a favorite lens for mine of Aurora, Northern Lights and Aurora, not only still pictures, but movies and time lapses. Because at f2, you can really get stuff very quickly and take a lot of shots for a time lapse, or even movies. Cameras can do real-time movies of the Northern Lights now, but you need a really fast lens to make that work, f2 or faster. And this has been a favorite lens of mine. That's why I bought it twice now. Now that I'm sort of focusing just on Canon cameras, I wanted to have this lens for the Canon lens mount. So that's a Venus Optics,
Okay.
which is one of the many brands of manual lenses you can buy these days.
Cool. And that was our walk through some of these lenses here.
Yeah, and then the third one there on from left to right is that Venus Optics I just showed you, and then the next one over is one I owned for a few weeks and sent back. It's an Irix Lens, 15 millimeter f2.8, I think. Very popular lens. It's nice because it's got a click stop for infinity, and so when you're manually focusing, you don't even have to manual focus. Just click it over to infinity. But optically, it did not test very good at all for the sample I had. And I mentioned that in the story, that if you're buying these lower costs, and still you're talking a few $100s, buy from a place where you can return it and exchange it or refund it or whatever, because you do find lens to lens, unit to unit variations. You get bad copies where the optics just aren't very sharp and they're not performing the way they should. And so you have to send it back. And so I mentioned that in the story. You should buy from someplace where you can exchange it or get a refund fairly easy. And I wasn't in this particular case, but I'm kind of switching over to mirrorless cameras now. And that lens isn't made for mirrorless cameras, but I talk about that in terms of using lenses that are made for DSLRs on a mirrorless camera. You can do, but I just found I wasn't likely going to use that lens very much anyway. So I just got my money back on that one.
There you go. And there's some lovely shots on a 14 and 20.
Yeah. Now here we're showing, what focal length should you buy if you're going to buy one lens for Nightscapes. Hard to say, but 14 and 20, that's a very popular focal length because you're taking in a big sweep of the Milky Way, and that Milky Way core, particularly in our northern hemisphere summer, it's kind of the choice subject.
Yep.
And the 14 millimeter lens just takes on a great big sweep across the landscape. The 20 millimeter begins to focus in a little bit more, but still that's a broad, especially if you got a big sky country landscape like that at Milk River in southern Alberta. Beautiful. So that's a great range of focal lengths, 14 or 20 in that area.
Cool.
And that's the lens you'll use most often. And I would say a 14 perhaps, but a 20, a lot of people like the 20 as well. And a 20 millimeter lens for nightscape stuff. You really pick up a lot of, especially a fast lens, pick up a lot of detail without some of the distortions, which we show in the next page over, some of the distortions, which you start to get into the really wide lenses.
Okay. And you mentioned a little bit there, you can go 35 to get a little bit more of a zoom, and even up to 85 for
yes, you certainly can. And as I say, there's even a place for a telephoto lens. Maybe not a long telephoto, but 85 to 135 millimeter or so, where you can now zoom in on parts of the Milky Way, but still include a fragment of the horizon of the landscape.
Okay.
So-called deepscapes, where you're sort of picking out a mountain peak or something like that and getting a shot of a part of the Milky Way or some deep sky object, the Andromeda Galaxy, rising above this landscape. I think I've got an example on the next page of that, what we call deepscapes. But the table here talks about the field of view of these different lenses. Here we go. Here, there's the 35 millimeter, which is still a wide angle, but it's not terribly wide.
Yeah.
And so you're getting into the Milky Way with more detail, and you're seeing a bit more structure and detail on nebulas.
Yep.
there,
Yep.
but still taking in a nice landscape. This is a classic scene at Waterton Lakes National
Oh, yes,
Park.
been there. Been there.
And then over on the right is the 85 millimeter from a spot in Waterton Lakes called Cameron Lake, where now we're really zooming in on top of a mountain and part of Scorpius, very photogenic area of Scorpius. And so this is a composite in the sense that I took the shots of the stars on a tracker and then turned the motor of the tracker off to get the shots of the landscape. So it's two different shots, but taken only moments apart. And so it's the Milky Way really was there above the mountain that night I took it. Unlike some pictures,
Wasn't totally photoshopped.
Unrelated pictures together and call it done. No, that's not what we do.
Really?
So this is within 85. So just to show that even a telephoto has its place, but I would say 80% of your nightscapes are going to be with a 14 to 24 lens. So
yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Now, one of the things we're showing here in the field of view is, and that one of the things you have to consider once you kind of narrow down your focal length, you have to take into consideration, well, what kind of camera do I have? Not only the brand of camera, you got to buy the lens that's going to fit your brand, Canon, Nikon, whatever. But if you've got a crop frame camera, then a 14 millimeter lens like this on a crop frame camera is not going to give you as wide a field of view as it will on a full frame camera, because the sensor is just that much smaller on a crop frame camera. So it'll still give you a wide field, but not as wide. So the table of field of views there shows you what each lens and the sort of typical popular focal lengths will give you with the various focal lengths of lenses.
Full frame and then crop frame. Here we go. Yep.
Yeah. And so a 14 millimeter, won't give you as wide a field of view. So if you want a really wide field, what we're saying there is you might have to go like a 10 millimeter lens to get the same field of view as a 14 mil lens will on a crop frame camera. So that's what we're showing here, is that what's the equivalent focal length of lens to give you that same field of view.
Yes.
And the crop frame cameras, can work great, but it's tougher to get those ultra wide fast lenses for a crop frame camera. And so that's where, for Nightscapes, we kind of like to get into the full frame cameras as much as possible, where we got a sensor here, as I'm showing here, that's the size of a 35 millimeter film frame. Okay. And there we are. We can.
Oh yeah, I see it now. Yeah.
And so that's what we mean by full frame, is that the sensor is the size of 35 millimeter frame versus a crop frame where it's about a 60% smaller.
Yeah.
And those cameras are cheaper and can work perfectly well, but you won't get as wide a field of view with any given lens as you will with the full frame camera like this, which is a Canon R6 mirrorless camera.
Yes. Very cool.
So when making your decision of lenses, you kind of have to take, well, what camera am I going to put it on? Not just now, but maybe in the future when you upgrade to a full frame camera. And you really should think about doing that if you really get serious into nightscape photography. They are better in many respects than a crop frame camera, less noisy as well for the most part.
Okay, interesting, good.
So that's the section on crop frame versus full frame. And then you got to think about, again, your camera brand. Buy the lens that's going to fit on your camera brand. Canon has a different lens mount than Nikon and Sony. They're all different. And even within a brand, a lens that will fit on a Canon mirrorless camera, Canon crop frame camera won't necessarily fit on one of their full frame cameras. So you have to think about, or if it fits, it won't work on a full frame camera. So you have to think about what you have now versus what you might want to get in the future in terms of being future proof for your lens. And you don't have to rebuy all your lenses again when you do graduate to full frame.
Cool. Very cool.
And then the next section, as if you don't have enough.
Yeah, you got a change in technology coming up.
The way in the balance here, brands and crop frame, full frame, and focal lengths and speed is, and this is of course new in the last 3 or 4 years, I guess.
Yeah.
Is DSLR, digital single lens reflex, versus what I call, and other people do as well, but it's not a term that's gone into common acceptance, DSLM, which means digital single lens mirrorless camera, which is like I just showed you here with the Canon. And so its sensor is set quite closely inset into the camera body here. It's only a few millimeters in, and so the depth between where the lens goes and the sensor is much shallower. What we call the flange distance is much shallower on a mirrorless camera than it is on a digital single lens reflex camera, which is one of these, which has the mirror in it, just like your old film cameras. Yeah, got a mirror in it, and when you press the shutter button, the mirror goes up, and in the back there is the sensor, but it's set way back deep into the body.
Right.
So the flange distance between the lens flange and the sensor is quite a bit longer. And so a lens that fits on this camera here, no problem, it'll fit on, won't fit onto a mirrorless camera. Not only is the lens mount different, but even if it fit in the focus, it wouldn't reach focus.
Because
the distance is different. And so what do you get? You have to get an adapter, which are not that expensive, which now allows you to put a lens made for a DSLR onto a mirrorless camera, and that works. And I mean, it works fine. Okay. And it just complicates your equipment a little bit. I've lost one of these at one point, had to rebuy it, and then I'm always forgetting where it is, when I want to use this lens on this camera, and so it does work, and so you can, a lens that's made for a DSLR, more traditional DSLR, been on the market for 20 years or so, will fit on a mirrorless camera, but not the opposite. A lens like this Venus Optics, made for a mirrorless camera, will not go on a DSLR because it just focuses too close. So you have to be careful again in terms of buying lenses. Make sure you get one that's not going to fit on your camera. Or once again, if you're buying one that's made for a DSLR, you're okay with that. But if you go to strictly mirrorless, you'll be able to use it. But will you want to? Because stupid inconvenient adapters you always have to worry about. And I'm kind of getting away from those and just going to the dedicated mirrorless lenses. And using those, and yeah, they're not cheap, but they're very good.
They're a little more Cool.
So that's the DSLR versus DSLM. And there's a wide array now of lenses made for the mirrorless cameras, and a lot of manufacturers making lenses just for the mirrorless cameras. So once again, just because it's for Canon doesn't mean it's for your Canon. But as I showed you, like the Venus Optics, here is this lens that's on the top of the page you're showing there now. This is the TT Artisan. Well, we didn't know about this. This camera company didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago. But with the mirrorless cameras now, there's a lot more freedom to design some unique and very innovative lenses. And this is that 11 millimeter full frame fisheye f2.8.
Wow,
it's a great lens for auroras and nightscapes. And that's what we're showing here on the top of that page is an example taken with that very lens that I just showed you, 11 mil full frame. And those are not that expensive. They're manual, but they're made only for mirrorless. And there's quite a few brands now with very appealing lenses for nightscapes. But it's an example of what we call a full frame fisheye. So the horizon is actually curved, which takes in a big chunk of sky, but it's maybe not what you want for a nightscape. Whereas this other lens I've showed you, this Rokinon 14 millimeter, that's the one in the middle of the page there. That's wide angle, but it's what we call a rectilinear. And so it gives you a flat horizon, but things kind of distort at the edges, at the corners,
edges,
like buildings and things. And
okay,
that can be corrected for as well, but you lose a lot of the field of view when you do. But that's another, we're just showing the difference between a fisheye and a rectilinear. So there can be a 14 millimeter fisheye and a 14 millimeter rectilinear. You have to be careful about which one you're buying and get the one that you want. But both can do great jobs. So. And then down at the bottom of the page, we're showing an example of, yes, you can adapt DSLR lenses to mirrorless cameras with these adapters like I just showed you. What I found with some of the adapters from third parties, you can put a Nikon lens on a Sony camera now, or a Canon lens on a Sony camera, or a Nikon lens on a Canon camera with these adapters. But I found with some of them that they increase the aberrations. They actually make the aberrations worse when you do that. Yikes. Yeah. And here's so it's not an ideal combination. One of these lens adapters, wherever it's gone here, one of these lens adapters from the original manufacturer, Canon, Nikon, they work great, but the third-party ones work, but not necessarily. We're showing you the example of native versus adapted on a Sony, Nikon, and the aberrations get worse.
Yes, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Buyer beware.
Yeah. So there's a lot, and that's what the article is about, is really just, it's a rapidly changing and confusing market. But on the other hand, as we say at the end, the choice of lenses is better than ever before. The lens quality is better than ever before. And the mirrorless system allows designers to produce fast lenses, better quality, faster lenses than we ever had with DSLRs. This is a fisheye lens, a circular fisheye lens that's f2. I bought this after I wrote the article, I think. This is another Aurora lens here. Nice. This is gives you a circular fisheye format, f2. That kind of lens did not exist a couple of years ago. That's going to be fabulous for all sky Aurora shots. And this is another manual lens from TT Artisan, one of these boutique lens manufacturers.
Yeah, very good.
Great.
And lastly here, a little bit of talk about zoom versus prime.
Yeah, and the received wisdom in astrophotography was always that prime lenses, by meaning it's got a fixed focal length. It's a 24, that's it.
Right.
20, it's a 14, and most of the lenses I've showed you up to now, that's what they are. We're called prime lenses. The zoom lenses that can vary over a range of focal lengths, the received wisdom was that they were just much worse.
Yeah.
And you might use them and they have their place, but for astrophotography, where we're so picky about star images, you generally would not use them. And I kind of sold off a lot of the older zooms that I had, but now I'm using almost nothing but zooms.
Wow, there's a change.
Because like this guy here, I've showed you a couple of times, the 15 to 35, and that's the example we're showing you on the page, is this lens compared to a couple of primes. It's as good, if not better, than in terms of that sharpness across the field. Right. It's f2.8, not as fast as a real fast prime, but it's fast enough, and it's really good optical quality. And the nice thing about, say, like a 15 to 35, it's covering that whole range of focal lengths. So when you're out at a site, you don't have to fuss with switching lenses. Yeah. And you can just dial in and frame the picture just the way you want. Cool. And just have more freedom to compose, and just have one lens that'll do the whole job. So you don't have to worry about, I forgot my 14 at home, or I really need a 20 and I don't have, And so that's the advantage of a zoom. So that's where we end off in the articles, talking about zoom versus prime. And in the old days, you kind of said, well, zoom's not so good, but now, no, not. And that I showed you a Canon RF, but Nikon and Sony have very good zoom lenses for their mirrorless. Again, it's the mirrorless cameras that have made better lens quality possible. And so a zoom lens is a very good choice for Nightscapes now. It gives you that flexibility, and it might cost more. On the other hand, it's replacing 2 or 3 lenses.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you see mirrorless overtaking the world?
It almost already has. Not in terms of number of cameras out there, no.
Yeah.
And I don't know about number of cameras being sold today of, serious cameras. I don't know what those numbers are, but Canon and Nikon are still producing DSLRs, but they're not introducing any new ones. And no one expects them to do that now. And so the old ones, they'll continue to make them because there's a market for that. But all the new cameras coming out of for serious photographers are all mirrorless. Sony took the lead, and then Canon and Nikon followed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then there's Leica and Panasonic. The only company left that's just making DSLRs is Pentax.
Oh, okay.
They have a very small portion of the market.
Yeah.
They have a loyal following, but and I tested a Pentax camera a few years ago for Sky and Telescope that had a special astrophoto mode in it, and it was a nice camera. But these days, you're buying a new camera, you really would have to think about DSLR or mirrorless. Mm-hmm. And DSLR is going to be a dead end. Mirrorless is where it's going. Cool. No question.
All right.
And that's where the big shift in the market has been in the last 2 or 3 years, because of Canon and Nikon getting
full into it. Yeah.
Full into that type of camera, because Sony showed them that's the way to go.
The way, it's the future. Yeah. Cool. Oh, and I'll just give a shout out. If you haven't seen Alan's backyardastronomy.com, do check it out. It's a pretty awesome site. And he's got a literature associated with that on the Backyard Astronomer's Guide.
There we are.
Let's get that up there. The Backyard Astronomer's Guide. Terrence gets a shout out.
Yeah. There's and this was actually, this picture on the front cover was taken with a mirrorless camera, but again, like a 24 millimeter lens, something like that, I forget. But I was thinking of the other comment shot that's in the article, was taken with a Nikon mounted lens for Sigma, adapted to a Sony Canon mirrorless camera. So there was a hybrid right there. But yeah, the book is out as a couple of months ago, and it's got it's massive.
Check it out.
Introduction to Amateur Astronomy cool. That I co-authored with Terrence Dickinson.
Yep, very nice. There's a shout out. Check it out. Alan, you mentioned it a couple of times. Where things might be headed in the future. And so I just want to pick up on that a little bit. Do you see any technologies coming over the hill besides mirrorless cameras that might spark a revolution? And do you anticipate any future Sky and Telescope articles coming up and that kind of stuff?
Well, I do have the next article I do have coming out in Sky and Telescope is in the March issue coming up. Okay. Which I've seen the proof of, but the magazine itself isn't out yet, won't be out for a little while. Mm-hmm. That's on Photoshop techniques, how to use Photoshop, what I call properly, professionally, as opposed to the way many astrophotographers do use it, which is not destructive.
Just
more professional methods of non-destructive processing with Photoshop for astrophotography, that so you can change things easily at any time. So that's the next article I've got coming out. That's sort of old techniques. Those are techniques that go back many years in many cases, but the astrophotographers just have never learned to do. In terms of equipment, in the kind of equipment we're talking about here, the mirrorless is being the big change. What's going to be the big revolutionary change? It's causing optics to be much, much better and sharper than ever before. And that's almost one of the main reasons to switch to mirrorless. You just get better quality of lenses now. Okay. But the thing we keep hearing little, rumors and hints of and teasing things is so-and-so is working on a new sensor, which will be so sensitive at night, and fabulous, and it will blow away everything we have today. At some point, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Where where we have to use 30-second exposures now. In the future, it'll be 1 second or something like that, because the sensor will be so much more sensitive, and yet not noisy, because of some incredible at the pixel level, photosite level technology. Sony just announced they're working on something like that. That's another step beyond what's in the current cameras. Cool. And so in 3 or 4 or 5 years time, that'll make its way. With cameras, it used to be with film cameras, and even with the DSLRs, where a new model was, but with film cameras, a new model was once at 10 years. Nikon F2 to F3. That was a major milestone. Now with the mirrorless cameras, if a camera is 2 years old, it's old, right? It's like computers.
Joints technology, right?
Yeah. And I got a well, I don't have it here, the Canon R. Canon's already discontinued the Canon RA camera, which I use for this picture here. I love it. I reviewed it in the Sky Telescope. Fantastic. I use it for most of my pictures. Canon's discontinued that. The R6 came out a couple of years ago. Well, in a couple of years' time, there'll be an R6 Mark II, with incredible. And most of the development is in autofocusing, where you can focus on your cat's eye, or the helmet of a motorcycle rider, when we don't need that for this kind of photography.
What?
The sensor quality, the noise versus the speed, and how noisy the sensors are, or how noisy they aren't, and how fast we can grab an image. And I expect we're going to see, well, we do see incremental changes to that from generation to generation. We may see a big jump if there's a whole new change in the CMOS technology and the sensors in 4 or 5 years. We don't know. And whatever Sony does, Canon's going to follow, or vice versa.
Very good. Very good. Alan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through your very lovely article.
Thank you very much, Frank. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. And that'll do, everyone. And I hope this made your astronomy day just a little bit better. And we will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.